Hello everyone, we are from Group 3 and we're going to talk about the study of language. There are a few topics that we are going to talk about. The first one is the study of language in 19th century, early to mid-20th century, mid to late 20th century, and the last one is 21st century.
19th century historical linguistics. Why is it called historical linguistics? Because it was happened in the past. It was a history. There are two important people that contributed to the study of language. Number one, Plato. Before 19th century, the study of language was mainly an interest to philosophers. Plato, a Greek philosopher, is said to have been the first person to distinguish between nouns and verbs. Number two, Sir William Jones. He read a paper to the Royal Asiatic Society in Calcutta pointing out that Sanskrit, the old Indian language, Greek, Latin, Celtic, and Germanic all had striking structural similarities.
Next, let's take a look at the study of language in early to mid-20th century. In the 20th century, the emphasis shifted from language change to language description. Instead of looking at how selection of items changed in a number of different languages, linguists began to concentrate on describing single languages at one particular point in time. This may have been initiated by a Swiss linguist, Ferdinand de Saussure, who is sometimes labeled the father of modern linguistics. He passed away without having written any major work on general linguistics. However, his students collected together his lecture notes after his death and published them under the title Course in General Linguistics. His crucial contribution was his statement that all language items are essentially interlinked, and that initiated the era of structural linguistics. It does not necessarily refer to a separate branch or school of linguistics. Structural in this broad sense merely means the recognition that language is a patterned system composed of interdependent elements rather than a collection of unconnected individual items. In the USA, linguistics began as an offshoot of anthropology. Around the beginning of the 20th century, anthropologists were eager to record the culture of the fast-dying American Indian tribes, and the American Indian languages were one aspect of this. Although often interesting, the work of those early scholars was, for the most part, haphazard and lacking cohesion. There were no firm guidelines for linguists to follow when they attempted to describe exotic languages. This state of affairs changed with the publication in 1933 of Leonard Bloomfield's comprehensive work entitled Language, which attempted to lay down rigorous procedures for the description of any language. Bloomfield had immense influence, and the so-called Bloomfieldian era lasted for more than 20 years. During this time, large numbers of linguists concentrated on writing descriptive grammars of unwritten languages. In the course of writing such grammars, a number of problems arose, which could not be solved by the methods proposed by Bloomfield. Then, the goal was to find the perfection of discovery procedures, a set of principles which would enable a linguist to uncover the linguistic units of an unwritten language in an easy way. The Bloomfieldians laid down a valuable background of linguistic methodology for future generations, but linguistics also became very narrow. Trivial problems of analysis became major controversial issues, and no one who was not a linguist could understand the issues involved. By around 1950, linguistics had lost touch with other disciplines and become a difficult subject of little interest to anyone outside it.
Mid to late 20th century. In this topic, we are going to discuss about generative linguistics and the search for universals. Linguistics took a new turning in 1957. Noam Chomsky, at the age of 29, when he was a teacher at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, published a book called Synthetic Structures. A book that only have a fewer than 120 pages is start a revolution in linguistics. Chomsky is arguably the most influential linguist of the 20th century. He is the linguist whose reputation has spread furthest outside linguistics. In the opinion of many people, Chomsky has transformed linguistics from relatively obscure disciplines of interest, especially into graduate students and future missionaries, into major social science that have direct relevance not only to linguists but also to psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists, philosophers, and others. Chomsky claimed a grammar should be more than a description of old utterance. It should also take into account possible future utterance. In short, the traditional point of view that the main task of linguists is only to describe a collection of utterance that actually cannot explain the characteristic of productivity or creativity, as Chomsky preferred to call them. Chomsky used the word grammar to mean not only the rules which a person has inside their head which specify the sequence of their language, but also a linguist's attempt to express these rules, which he labeled a generative grammar. A generative grammar is a grammar that consists of a set of statements or rules that specifies which sequence of a language are possible and which impossible. Chomsky initiated the era of generative linguistics. Chomsky not only introduced the idea of generative grammar, he also proposed specific types of such grammars: a transformational generative grammar. A transformational generative grammar is a system of language analysis that recognizes the relationship among the various elements of a sentence and among the possible sentences of a language, and uses the process or rules, some of which are called transformation, to express these relationships. Chomsky also redirected attention towards language universals. He pointed out that as all humans are rather similar, their internalized language mechanisms are likely to have important common properties. He argued that linguistics should concentrate on finding elements and constructions that are available to all language, whether or they actually occur. Chomsky suggested the constraints on human language are inherited ones. Human beings may be pre-programmed with a basic knowledge of what languages are like and how they work. Chomsky has given the label universal grammar to this inherited core. On his later work called Minimalist Program became increasingly abstract as he tried to specify broad general principles underlying all language. But now, Chomsky was the major linguistic influence for the second half of the 20th century. He still has many loyal followers, but he also has criticisms. They argue that Chomsky overemphasized the boundaries, the limits on which human language operates.
The future, 21st century. What the future holds. 1. The born of new major. Because of Chomsky's influence, language became more valuable, and as a result, a new major was born. The examples are psycholinguistics and sociolinguistics. 2. Grammar is not a single unified system, but a collection of simpler systems. 3. Later, linguistics have moved to looking at language as a collection of different ability.